Educate, empower, enable, impact. Thank you for tuning in to That Will Never Work podcast, where we share inspiring information and personal experiences related to business and the entrepreneurial journey from those who are leaders in their respective field. Now, here is your host, author and business coach, Maurice.
Thank you very much for tuning in today. I have a high energy, motivating individual with us today. He is a professional speaker, a professor, an author, a podcast host, and a frequent podcast guest. His combination of content plus high energy makes him an easy choice for subject matter in sales, marketing, leadership, customer service, and many more things. And he has earned a Stevie Award as well as other accolades, and serves as the VP of Sales and Development for a $1.5 billion industrial distributor. He works his skills daily on the front lines of sales and marketing. And today we're going to talk about motivating the motivator. And so one of the things I listened to this gentleman's story, and he talked about who inspired him. You know, he wanted to be an oceanographer at one particular time. And then he went and saw someone. It was funny. The individual that influenced him was someone who I believe swam, if I'm correct on that. So it was funny listening to that comparison. But I introduced to all of you today, Curt. Curt, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Hey, Maurice, thank you so much. And thank you, listeners, for the opportunity to connect with you today on this exciting podcast.
So, Curt, I have a question. So a lot of times as being the motivator, as coaches, as speakers, a lot of times we're expending a lot of energy, and a lot of times we don't get that energy back. So who would you suggest needs to motivate the motivator?
Great question, Maurice. Who motivates the motivator? For me, I have a band of brothers that I connect with. And I know that your listeners, whether they're entrepreneurial at nature, they're professionals, they're all sorts of different roles that they have. A lot of the times your energy can get completely drained out. And,
right.
Just last month, I did a lot of work, classroom facilitation type of work and speaking. So who motivates the motivators? I highly recommend a band of brothers or a band of sisters that can gather around you and speak truth and speak life back into you, because it can get lonely. You could start binging out on comfort food. You can find yourself in places that you shouldn't really be, which messes with your head. And that just kind of is a self-defeating purpose. So to get out of that, I would say that recruiting that band of brothers or band of sisters who can come alongside you and breathe that motivational life back into you.
So as we're talking about building a community around us, sometimes we don't understand who's authentic, in that community. We're not sure who's, because even though we're working on putting that community together, we're not sure who's going to be that individual that could still suck stuff out of us, So how would you suggest for someone to kind of weed out those individuals that's not there from a genuine space where we can feed off of each other versus someone that's trying to suck everything out?
I think over time, you get what I would call like a spidey sense. You get a tingling feeling that says, hey, this person's more of a taker than a giver. They're not interested in me for me, but they're interested in what I could do for them. And I try to think about what I call limited associations. Instead of spending 2 hours with that person, neck that down to 20 minutes. Or if 20 minutes is too much with that person, neck that down to 2 minutes. I think we know inherently the people who are sucking the energy out of us, they're what we would call takers. And tragically, a lot of the listeners who are listening to this right now, we might see ourselves as givers. We give and give and give. And pretty soon, there are no more resources to give. And so I would say you have to be very diligent and focused on recruiting the people around you who's going to be that part of that band of brothers or sisters.
So as we, because sometimes we think of those individuals, our band of brothers or sisters, as people we might have grown up with, it could be our cousins, that first line, that baseline of relationships. So in that, we might rely on them a little too much sometimes. We might be way too comfortable. So how do we find that those individuals also that's going to continue to push us to reach our greatest selves?
Maurice, that's a great question and a challenging question for me because at first, way, way long time ago, I surrounded myself with family and friends.
Mm-hmm.
And they could only take me so far because they couldn't speak that truth into me because they weren't part of my business development. So then I started recruiting. And back in the day when I was authoring a book or speaking on circuit, I would find other great speakers and I would just say, look, I would like 15 minutes of your time. I'd like 20 minutes of your time. And I'd find the people, there's a great prophetic idea that as iron sharpens iron, one person sharpens another. And I would recruit great speakers, great sales coaches, sales managers. And what happened was I was fortunate within my community in Houston, part of the National Speakers Association, that I found 4 other speakers and we would meet monthly for coffee and just share tragedies on the road, ideas that we could pick up on. We would riff off of each other. And they were not family and they were not friends. They were professional associates. And I gave to them as much as they gave to me. And so that's where that iron sharpened iron.
So now we're talking about, like you said, your sales professional group, right? So in that iron sharpens iron, a lot of times we look at that as a competitive, right? We become very competitive and we may want to best our friend, right? Or it can also bring us down in some of those situations. How important is that to have just that person to be competitive without burning ourselves out, without killing ourselves, without becoming disenfranchised, whatever it might be, so how do we keep that balance with that?
Great question. The balance that I found in my personal was at first I was immature and I was competing with the people I was trying to recruit as my mentor or as my band of brothers. How could I get better than them? How could I talk more? And after a while, I moved away from being that amateur to being that professional. I respected them for the craft and the trade that they're in. And I chose not to compete with them. I chose to compliment them. And it takes a while. It's almost like kissing a lot of frogs before you get the king or the queen or the prince or the princess. I had a couple of people who were very egotistical and they thought, wow, now that Curt wants to sit under my wisdom, I'm just going to become that person.
Right.
And others would just say, hey, look, I know that we're competing with each other, but we're really not. We're not really competing with each other. Here's what I've learned. Here's what I see in you. Here are some of the mistakes I've made along the way. And they were willing to share that. And I can remember as if it was yesterday, Tom Antion is a professional speaker. And this must have been 25 years ago. I saw him speak in Houston. And I said, Tom, I would love to spend 20 minutes with you to just get a better understanding of who you are. He invited me up to his hotel room. He gave me an hour. And his greatest piece of wisdom for me was, Curt, how can you become the easiest speaker to book, the easiest speaker to work with? Now, that was pure gold because I fashioned my entire career from that one conversation. And I tried to become low maintenance, easy to get along with, bundling kind of a guy. And that allowed me to compete on the stage with a lot of other people who were a little bit more seasoned in their craft, a lot more expensive in their speaking engagement fees. But I remember what Tom said about Curt, be the easy guy, fly Southwest Airlines, take a decent hotel, try to get an average rental car, make sure that you make it easy for that. And I use that not only in my professional speaking on the stage, but also when I was doing my sales training and some of that coaching. How could I make it easy for the client to say, gosh, let's just hire Curt. He's the easiest one. So to the long answer to your short question is finding those people who, even though you compete with them, you can have conversations with them. And I see this. I recently attended a professional basketball game, and I saw the two teams competing on the court. I also saw them during the TV breaks and stuff, kind of having that camaraderie. Like, hey, you and I could play on a pickup game out in the field, and we'd still be friends. But when we're on the court, we're seriously competitors.
Right.
But we can learn from each other. And I gotta believe the LeBron James and the Michael Jordans and the Larry Birds, they shared, they mixed it up with somebody who they respected as their peer. And I think once we get to that point in our entrepreneurial journey, when we become that professional that can rub shoulders and sharpen a sword with someone else, I think it really advances who we are.
So, in your industry, being in sales, we think of sales as an industry that is so cutthroat, that I have to eliminate my competitor. Like I have to destroy them, and sometimes we look at sports in the same manner. So for you to say that, hey, someone encouraged you to be not so, hard on, your competitors, how hard has that been able to balance that, right, in this particular industry that you've chosen?
Wow. I love that question. Let's just take it from a sales conversation. You said people are cutthroat, we're aggressive, we're that. That's on the left hand. On the right hand side, it's all about building relationships. And so they kind of compete against each other. How can you build a true, genuine relationship if you're trying to be cutthroat? So, there's an ABC, always be charming. And I think I try to disarm by the ability to say, look, I'm not going to go after you in an aggressive stance until I get to know the person as a relational person. And then I might not be competing on price. I might be competing on value, on delivery, on quality, on the pain that you have. There's so many other things we can kind of look at, but tragically, we're always taught, go after that person and cut them off at the knees and be aggressive.
Right.
And I think from a sales or a business perspective, I think the consumer, B2B or B2C, we're tired of that sales tactic.
Okay.
We really want someone who can understand us, who can provide us with education and value and make a recommendation based on taking the time to understand the other person.
So what other type of skills, because being an entrepreneur, we're selling all the time, right? Quote unquote. So what other type of skills would I need to develop as an entrepreneur besides, this educational piece that you're talking about, also always being kind and creative and all those type of things. What other type of skills would I need to develop as an entrepreneur?
I think the one that really comes to mind right now, Maurice, is the ability to be resilient. Resiliency is absolutely a trait of great sales pros. It's also a trait of great entrepreneurs. There's so many entrepreneurs who have failed. Hey, let's release this product to the market. It failed. Let's release this particular dish in the restaurant. It failed. We don't pack up our bag and go home. We determine, okay, that's one way of not making it work. It's almost like the old Edison, how did you create the light bulb? Well, I failed 1,000 times before I got it right. And if you're struggling with that and you're listening to this and you have a relationship with ChatGPT, you can go to ChatGPT and say, what are the top 10 ways to become more resilient? And that computer program using artificial intelligence will spit out 10. And you could look at that and say, okay, let me put that against my current philosophy. Do I have that resiliency? Do I have that confidence? And so that's a huge trait to have, because as entrepreneurs, it's not going to work 1,000% of the time. Even if you look at Bezos, if you look at Musk, if you look at Zuckerberg, these guys are multi-billionaires, but they failed. There's some things that they've done that has been horrible, but they didn't pack up their bag and go home. They just said, okay, what can we do that's different? And so that's a huge trait.
So we're talking about failure. And in this world of participation trophies, if you will, where everyone does not experience that space of failure, where the second place team is just as important as the first place team, and so sometimes we don't look at failure in the same way, and we don't learn. We don't even have the opportunity to learn from it. So how would you suggest for someone to, in that space, who's been getting these participation trophies along the way, to even accept that and take it as a learning strategy to move forward?
Yeah, let me try to unpack that, Maurice, in a way that makes your listeners understand what I'm trying to articulate. I grew up tragically outside of the participation trophy genre.
I did too.
I grew up where if you got second place, you got first, last place.
Right.
In my high school, I took a foreign language. I took German. We took a quiz every week. And after the quiz, we would be reseated based on the scores of our quizzes. And we were in a U-shaped class. And so there was a lot of that hyper competitiveness and that failure or that participation trophy. I don't really understand it, but although I understand in the present cultures or in the workforce, we see some of that. And
right.
And I think, I look at failures, I look at athletes. Skateboarders. I love my son. My son loves skateboarding, but it took him hundreds of failures on a kickflip before he could master that. So there's some failure there. I look at soccer, professional soccer, and sometimes after 90 minutes of play, you get 1-0. And so how many failed shots did you take? You set it up properly. You got to the striker, but they took a shot and they failed. How many times does a professional baseball player strike out?
Right.
Failure is just part of the game. And I think you got to put your participation trophies away. Put them in a box, put them away. That's not the way business runs. We can't settle, because I think the speed of change and the speed of business and the speed of demand doesn't settle for participation. And so I think what you're seeing now is a resurgence of this competitive edge, because we've got technology that can compare one price to another, one model to another, one SKU to another. And in immediacy, that consumer, business or consumer, can make a decision. And that decision can create failure for everyone who didn't get picked. No participation trophy for that. Your website gets built. Nobody comes to it. You got a nice product offering on the shelf there at the supermarket. Nobody picks it up. Failure. It's just part of the game.
So in that space, how do we stay motivated? Because we're not motivated by the losses. We're motivated by the wins, quote unquote, because we're too consumed with our neighbor next door. We're consumed with the person in the cubicle right next to us, whatever it might be. We're overhearing certain situations. So how do we stay motivated in those spaces?
Research. My motivation is all about research. What is the market demanding? What are my competitors offering? Where is the future going? It's the old Wayne Gretzky, I skate to where I think the puck is going to be, in the hockey analogy. I really encourage, if it's a sales pro, to research their field, their market, their customer. I have them research behavioral styles and personalities so that they can have a competitive edge in the market. And that way, when you put a product out there or a service out there and it fails miserably, goes back to the research. Maybe we do an exit interview. Maybe we do a sales autopsy. Hey, why did that not work? Why did you pick product A versus product B? Why did I not get the job in the interview? What did I do wrong? Research. I think that's that research that creates that wisdom and that insight and that aha moment. And this is, oh, well, if I change this and I do a little that and I resubmit it, next thing you know, I get a couple. When I teach at the University of Houston, one of the sales books I always tease the students on is the Dr. Seuss book, Green Eggs and Ham. And people go, well, what is that all about? I said, read it. It's all about selling. It's all about selling this value proposition of green eggs and ham through a series of rhymes, and the rejection and the rejection and the failure until finally, through persistence and research, because of the different ways they presented the story, finally took them up on that offer. And the next thing you know, it was, yeah, I love green eggs and ham. Oh my gosh. And so I think even though that's a children's story, it does have a lot of value as it relates to research, present, change, adapt, overcome, and continue to go forward.
Wow, Curt, I appreciate it, man. I appreciate it. So let me ask you this question before we let you go. Where can they contact you to get their green eggs and ham, their base, their foundation to move forward in being motivated in their entrepreneurship, journey, even just their corporate America journey? Where can they find this information from you?
You bet. I've got a simple website. It's all one word. It's called Peak Sales Strategy. PeakSalesStrategy.com is my website. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. I'm absolutely part of that giver mentality that I'll pay it forward. You've got a question, you're stuck, you're driving in your car right now, and you're like, man, I would love to ask Curt a question. Find me, shoot me an email. I'm right there. I'm willing to help. I don't see you as a competitor. I see you as a complement. And what I want to do is come alongside you and get you out of that stuck nature, celebrate that win with you, and maybe brainstorm a little bit on how we might be able to help you readjust and go forward.
Cool. I appreciate it, Curt. So before I let you go, my question that I ask everyone, my would you rather question: would you rather choose 3 doors or a fork in the road?
I would choose a fork in the road because it's binary.
So can you explain a little further?
Sure. In the 3-door analogy, I've got too many choices, and tragically, I actually use that in my sales presentations: good, better, best. But in a fork in the road situation, I might say, okay, literally, there's a fork in the road. I can either go to the left or to the right. And so, again, that's a simple analogy. You may come back, Maurice, and say, yeah, but Curt, the fork splits into 12 different directions, and now I'm stuck. But I love your question because it's an unanswerable question. You must have some kind of a psychological background that you're absolutely sizing me up right now based on the fact that I said fork in the road, not 3 doors.
Actually, I'm not. I'm not. I think it's just a question to help the listeners to understand who you are, and for them to answer that same question for themselves. Do I want 2 options or 3? Because in that question, I don't give any parameters. In that question, I think it shows how much in the box we may be ourselves, and we may overanalyze the situation. So that's
great
the whole
insight. Absolutely. Well said. For somebody who's very analytic, I could see this being a tough choice with a fork in the road.
Most definitely. I mean, I'm a fork in the road person. Right or left, right or wrong, let's figure it out.
You bet.
Yeah. So, but Curt, I thank you very much for coming on the show.
You bet. Thank you, Maurice. It's great questions.
Sure. No problem. And thank you for listening to That Will Never Work podcast.
Thanks for listening. Find us on social media at Chisholm Group LLC and check back weekly for new episodes. Until next time, that will never work, or will it?
Perfect.